This is like a minefield. This is, yeah, and don't get me wrong, this is our own fault as Oracle, because over the years, we've invented 10,000 ways of doing notifying applications or tracking changes. Let me fly through some of the examples. I got to keep an eye on the time as well, don't I? Here's our database. Hopefully you can see and understand my terrible writing. And here's the redo logs. So we're going to do, in a nutshell here, what are your options? Anyone laughing on the chat line at my writing abilities will be kicked off the call, I might add. Okay, so here are some of the options that you can consider. The most simple one, right, and I'll write it up here, is using triggers. Triggers sit in your database, and it's fairly simple, right? You catch the data as it comes in by trigger, you write it off to a table. Now, the most common use for that is, for example, auditing information. As in terms of, and the reason I'm covering a few options here is the question wasn't really clear on whether they want to grab it and then send it onwards, or whether they want to capture an audit trail or the like, but I'll flick through a whole stack of them. Triggers are really good for capturing audit information. I made a change to the table, grab it. A couple of things you don't want to be doing is don't be doing non-transactional stuff in triggers, like autonomous or sending emails or writing to files, because triggers can actually fire multiple times for even a single operation, just because of the way Oracle works. So you can get dodgy results as a result. Inserting into other tables and the like, triggers are fine. I've drawn them up here because they obviously have an impact on your production system. You know, if you actually have them on your production system, the triggers actually add overhead to DML on your production system. That might be an issue. What people sometimes do is they'll do something like, okay, they'll say, well, let's do materialized view logs. They're more efficient than triggers because there's no actual trigger on the table. It's actually managed internally. You create a materialized view on the table, and it automatically captures all the changes. And then you can use that materialized view log to actually then derive the changed rows and send them off somewhere else. Having said that, please do not ever do that. I've seen this implemented so many places, and it's just a disaster. And not a disaster that's happened now, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Customers have no control over what's in a materialized view log. We build them to satisfy our needs for replication. A materialized view using materialized view logs is totally fine. Oh, I should probably draw it out there, shouldn't I? Materialized views, fine, because the technology for materialized view is bound to materialized view logs. But what I'm seeing more and more is people saying, well, materialized view logs capture the data I need anyway, and then I'll simply use that to write some queries and then trunket the materialized view log. The reason that is so incredibly fraught with risk is, what happens in 18.3 when we change the structure of a materialized view log? We might put in 10 rows for every row change. We might put in no row change. We might put in just an SCN number. We could do whatever we want because they're internal tables. Materialized view logs plus materialized views, that's a valid scenario. But please don't just capture data in materialized view logs and say that's good enough for me. Other things that you can do at the database, you can use triggers, and you can use triggers to simply, rather than catch the data itself, you can actually log them into an advanced queue. Queuing is very, very scalable. You can scale it to very good limits. And the reason that AQ is very useful is because you have those queue semantics. It can be an ordered facility such that as you then pick data off, you can actually pick it off in order it occurs and then send that out to external systems. So AQ coming from triggers is another option. What else we got? Once you've got AQ, you can consider, let's go for another color. Using things like MGW. That's the messaging gateway inside of Oracle. Once again, just part of the product. What that does is you can effectively map an external messaging system, like, for example, WebSphere or JMS, etc., with AQ, such that in the database, you simply stick things in AQ, and a daemon in the background takes things out of the advanced queue, sticks them into a third-party messaging queue, which might be then sent off to other places as well. In terms of notifying applications or other parts of your enterprise, messaging gateway coming from AQ also works very, very well as well. What else we got? Okay, so let's get down away from the database now. Let's say all these things are too expensive on the database. How do we now do it, for example, not on the database? Let's go down to a redo. You might be familiar with terms like streams, and something that's built on top of streams is a thing called change data capture. These are very popular technologies that have been used for many, many years, and sadly are no longer supported inside Oracle. From 12.2, I think, onwards, they're de-supported and certainly deprecated from earlier versions. If you're using streams or using CDC, you're going to need to move away. But I put these in there because there's still heaps of information out there about them. There's heaps of blog posts and stuff. So it's very easy to go, oh, streams, I'll use that. Be aware that you're setting yourself up for a problem. All these things have obviously been replaced with a technology called Golden Gate. And obviously the advantage of all these things is what they do is they mine the redo logs. Therefore, your application up here is, or your database performance is almost unimpacted, right? It's redo log mining. And that's obviously why Golden Gate is generally the preferred option as opposed to some of these. It's incredibly efficient. Also though, it comes with some restrictions. There are some things that you can't do in any kind of log mining facility in terms of data types and stuff like that. So once again, read the documentation carefully, but Golden Gate is generally our preferred solution. There's one obvious problem with Golden Gate. It's separately licensed. You have to pay for it. Now, once again, I don't want to sit there and say you should buy it or shouldn't buy it. I'm simply saying, does the investment justify the benefit? If it does, go ahead and buy it. If it doesn't, look at other options. There's third-party options. There's a company called DB Visit. There's some guys just across the water in New Zealand. They write a bespoke redo tracking system as well. There's those. I haven't been finished yet. Sort of sitting somewhere in the middle here are other options. There's one called Flashback Data Archive. What that is a background process. Oh, I can't remember what it's called now, but I'll just call it a background process. And you can simply say, I want to do a flashback data archive on a table in here, and asynchronously, we track all the changes that have ever happened into a separate set of tables. So it's like an audit trail without having to use triggers. You could use Flashback Data Archive as a means of capturing all the changes, and if necessary, then reading from that to maybe send to other applications. There's another one which is called Asynchronous Callback. And really, that's just an automated version of using something similar to what we've got up here with triggers and queues. But once again, it's asynchronous. You effectively associate entries, I think, with a table. And when you do DML on that table, effectively the system internally puts an entry in the queue. A database job is kicked off to process entries in that queue. And that database job then calls a routine of your deciding. So you could say whenever a row gets inserted into table X, that automatically gets put into a queue. A background job reads that queue and calls procedure Y. And that procedure is something you write yourself. So that's asynchronous callback. That's generally good for low scale things. Like if you're adding tens of thousands of rows to a table, you don't want to be creating tens of thousands of background jobs and queue messages. For example, something that says from time to time entries come into a table, I need to be told about it. Asynchronous callback is one option. For things like in the middle tier space, if you've got, for example, Java, .NET, etc., there's other things. There's one called object change notification. And that simply says whenever you change an object, it actually sends a message asynchronously to a daemon waiting on that message. And it's a non-blocking call. So you can have an application which is in .NET, for example, running away, and it'll be simply sent a message saying, by the way, you actually have to react to this message. That's been improved from 11.2 onwards into a thing called continuous query notification. And what continuous query notification is just an enhancement of that. Rather than saying, I'm interested in a particular object changing, which obviously might change lots of times of stuff that you're not interested in, continuous query notification simply says, I need to be notified only if the results of a particular query would have changed as a result of all these changes in various tables, etc. So man, that is a lot of options. You got a lot of stuff there you can work with.